Hello, everybody. This is Brian from Necronomicast. Thank you for tuning in for this exciting 13th season of the show. Couldn't do it without you. Now, if you're ever wondering if there was a kind of a fun and inexpensive way that you could support the production of the show, I've got news for you. You can go to buymeacoffee.com/Necronomicast. Every time I have an author on the show, I've purchased their book. Whenever a documentary filmmaker or a creative person is on the show to talk about their project, you know I've supported their project. So if you go to buymeacoffee.com/Necronomicast, that will enable me to continue to do the work that I do here on the show. So I thank you so very much from the bottom of my heart for all of the support and encouragement you've given me over the years. And you know what? If you buy me a cup of coffee at the website, I would be more than happy to deliver a personalized message to you on the show. 2 or more cups of coffee, you're going to get something in the mail. buymeacoffee.com/Necronomicast. And now, on with the show.
I want to picture someone visiting our planet and listening in, and they hear Brainiac. And they go, what the fuck is going on in that planet?
From down in the basements of Dayton, Ohio.
They had so much momentum.
Brainiac.
And Brainiac coming up.
You know, major label industry interest.
$1 million, $2 million, and just tons of hand wringing.
When you're that in demand.
At the time, I thought, wow, this band's really capable of something, I think, extraordinary.
It was a bad news week for the rising indie band Brainiac. Lead singer, 28-year-old Tim Taylor, was killed in an early morning single-car crash near his home in Dayton, Ohio. Brainiac was being courted by the majors at the time of Taylor's death.
I hope people realize that, yeah, this is a tragic story, but it's not a story about tragedy.
From the historic, haunted heartland of Omaha, Nebraska, my name is Brian Corey, and I welcome you all to this episode of Necronomicast. Now, back in 1997, indie rock band Brainiac was on top of the music world. Influential albums, successful tours, and a diehard following of fans until the sudden death of lead singer Tim Taylor. The remaining members of the band struggled after losing their lifelong friend and a $1 million record deal. My guest tonight, Eric Mahoney, created an incredible documentary entitled Transmissions After Zero about the life, the hard work, dedication, and friendship of Brainiac. So join me and filmmaker Eric Mahoney on this episode of Necronomicast. Now calling in, transmitting from Ohio, it's my pleasure to welcome to the show Eric Mahoney. Eric, what's up, man? How are you?
I'm good. How are you? Thanks for having me.
I'm super excited. I'm great. Thanks. I'm very excited to have you on the program, and I'm so glad that you agreed to this conversation tonight. I have to tell you, I was feeling nostalgic for my youth. I'm 48. I was feeling nostalgic for the music that invigorated me in my teens and 20s, and I thought back to bands like Brainiac. And lo and behold, this fantastic documentary made its way to my television set, and I watched it, thought about it, and then I watched it again. I watched it twice in a row. It made that much it made that much of an impression on me, and I just relived all the times that I saw Brainiac and listened to him, and just my whole punk upbringing, I guess, or my adolescence just came flooding. Those memories just came flooding back with your documentary, man. I absolutely loved it.
Well, thank you so much. That's really, really awesome to hear. It was a real honor for me to be able to do it. I grew up in Dayton. I think I'm a couple of years younger than you are. But yeah, obviously the same time and generation, and those guys meant a lot to me. And it was my absolute pleasure to get the opportunity to do that. So I'm glad you dug it, and I'm glad it's finding its way to people still, and it's still kind of having a life and finding its way out there in the world.
Yeah, one of the things I was going to ask you is how did you discover Brainiac? But fuck y'all, I'm from Dayton is probably going to be it. That's your answer.
That's it. I was very lucky to, I was kind of a young musician myself, and it was really cool to see that, this relatively small Midwestern town that I was growing up in had this remarkable local music scene. You could go out and see Guided by Voices and Brainiac, and obviously we all were aware that the Breeders were from there. They weren't really like a local band at the time, but they were, certainly from there. And there was just a slew of other really great bands too that you would just kind of pop in and see when you would go out to shows. And it was a really cool scene and time, and very inspiring for me personally, and I know it was for a lot of other people as well.
So yeah, growing up there in Dayton and having all those guys do local shows, we had a place in Omaha that was very formative to our music scene. And when I talk about like digging punk and everything, I was a band nerd and I was a trumpet player. And so I played in alternative bands, like as a horn section. I also did jazz and classical, and I played in a punk influenced ska band, and we played around the country. I mean, Chicago and New York and St. Louis and Kansas City and Minneapolis. So, I mean, I got out and about. But one of the great things that was in our formation as musicians was this record store, this bookstore in Omaha called the Antiquarium. 3 levels, books on floors 1 and 2, an art gallery on 3, and the basement was this punk rock record store, jazz, punk rock, indie rock. And it was headed up by a guy named Dave Sink. And Dave was friends with Camille from Grass Records.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah.
And we had in Omaha a band from Omaha called Mousetrap. Are you familiar with Mousetrap? Have you heard of them?
I am. Yeah. Were they on Grass as well? Yeah. Yeah.
So they were local heroes, and, we loved them, and we just thought they were just great because there was other bands, doing like reggae stuff and melodic stuff and alternative stuff, but Mousetrap was so in your face, and they like sneering and angry but funny in a lot of ways too, just kick ass. And I remember going down to the basement of the Antiquarium book and record store, and Dave Sink was down there, and he knew that I liked jazz. He knew that I liked Mousetrap because we bought their 7 inches and stuff, and he's like, you got to listen to this band that's on Grass. I bought this album from this band I never heard of before called Brainiac, and the album was Smack Bunny Baby.
Yeah.
And I took it home and I put the vinyl on, and at first I thought, do I have it still on for 7 inches? Do I have the speed? I'm like, what I was hearing coming from the speakers was so incredible. You know what I mean? It was just, I just couldn't believe it. And I over time I learned about their jazz influences, especially, Tim's jazz influence and everything. And just being in Omaha and having that kind of Grass Records, indie punk avenue to explore, I just couldn't believe what I was hearing jumping out of my speakers. So being in Dayton, it must have been like going to shows all the time, like so exciting.
Yeah, very much so. It was. It's funny that you bring up the record speed thing too, because the guy, a good friend of mine, Jamie, who mixed the film for us, is a old school Brainiac fan and has, copious amounts of all material surrounding the band, and is a huge fan. And he just picked up the latest release of theirs. That's sort of, some of the stuff they were working on when Tim passed. And he called me up and he was like, man, I'm really digging, these kind of unearthed tracks that they did. And then I realized I had it on the wrong speed. and this is an audio engineer, this is like a professional, television mixer or musician, lifelong fan of the band and had put on a new record of theirs and had literally no idea which speed to play it on. Which I thought was just hilarious. But yeah, I mean, that's a staple of their sound for sure. It's like, sounds good at any, on any RPM.
Right. What got you the idea of putting together like a documentary? What was the genesis of it? I need to do this. I mean, because it's so well put together and it's obviously very well thought out. And you have these great revealing interviews with the band, people in the scene, interviews with his mom and sister, Tim's mom and sister. I mean, it just is just such a great wide view of not only the band and how exciting they were live and in studio, but what they meant for like your community and for indie rock at large. What brought you to putting together this film?
Well, I think it was a lot of things. I think one was, first and foremost for me, I'm not a huge fan of like rock docs per se, but I think that this story was one that was very interesting and very human, and really, you know, some of the underlying themes of this whole thing are you know, processing loss and grief and what you do with that. You know, what was always so fascinating and tragic for me, you know, when Tim passed was thinking about what the other three guys in the band, like their entire lives, you know, did a 180 literally overnight in their 20s on the precipice of signing a 7-figure record deal, you know, and that's a heavy thing, you know. And I you know, I thought that was, you know, that was something that I thought would be really interesting to unpack, in addition to kind of doing a proper, you know, kind of history and doing a deep dive into the band and so forth. But I also thought, you know, it's something I thought about, to answer your question kind of directly. It's something I thought about for years about doing, but the timing around, I finished producing my first narrative feature film in 2016 and was looking for something else to do. And the timing around it, I went back to the Brainiac idea, as I had, you know, many years prior, just as something to think about. And I realized it was coming up to be 20 years anniversary of Tim's passing and 25 years anniversary from Smack Money Baby, their first LP. And I thought, well, those are two kind of milestones. Why don't I reach out to the band and see, you know, I know that they hadn't really, you know, done much in the way of like processing this personally themselves either, or spoken much about it in the last 20 years. So I kind of took their temperature, and, you know, immediately everyone that I reached out to, both with you know, Tim's family, the band, producers, friends, everyone was just like a resounding yes. Oh my God, this sounds amazing. Let's do it. And so it just kind of felt like the timing was right, you know, to kind of finally approach this. And I think that everyone was emotionally in a place where they were ready to talk and share and kind of, you know, get into the weeds of this a little bit in terms of, you know, it was a big monumental shift in a lot of people's lives. And I think that for many, many years, just kind of got compartmentalized and wasn't really discussed. And it just seemed like that was a good time to do it. So you know, part of it was just the timing. And I think people were ready to talk.
Yeah. So at the end of the doc, or toward the end, you have the three remaining or the surviving members of Brainiac kind of together, sitting together and talking. Was that like one of the first times they got together after the funeral or the death and of everything of Tim?
No, they had certainly kept in touch over the years. You know, from asking them, you know, how they sort of dealt with it as a band, they didn't, you know. So, I mean, I think personally they sort of kept in touch, you know, just as friends, and, you know, we're still in each other's lives to a degree, but, yeah, had never collectively really, you know, from what I hear from them, ever really talked about what happened, you know, for 20 years. So it was just sort of like this, you know, elephant in the room, I think, with them. And now I think that now they're on the other side of that, I think they're in a healthier and better place, and probably, you know, even closer.
Yeah, I was glad to see that those guys are doing well.
Yeah.
Juan's featured probably, well, they're all, you know, featured kind of equally, but I think I resonated more with Juan because he was fifth grade friends. You start out the show talking about how they were cello buddies together in school, and how they were in a talent show like in fifth grade, and how they kind of bonded right away in earlier projects and everything. And they weren't just bandmates or, you know, guys that just responded to a one ad to put a show, you know, like a band together. They, you know, they were friends. They lived in a van together. They toured around together. They worked hard together, and, you know, they scraped by shopping at thrift stores and sleeping on floors. And, you know, they really lived the life of a touring, working indie musician in the 90s. And what an exciting time that was. Chaotic as hell, but super, super cool, super fun. And I like the fact that, you know, you focus a lot on Tim and his early life and what a genius he was. And I'm not saying that lightly. You know, I remember seeing them in 94, I think it was in 95. I think I'm in your video. I think I'm in the movie because I noticed that there's
nice.
I noticed that there's some footage from a Capitol Bar and Grill show of Brainiac in Omaha, Nebraska.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. Yes.
I was there, so I'm like,
yeah. So you might be in there.
I think my head might be bopping up and down once in a while, but I mean, that was such a nut show, and I remember being there. And I was a music major at UNL, the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and I remember, you're in music school and you're taught discipline and repetition and working all these scales and patterns and things to become proficient at your instrument. And so many professors or other music students would look like a band that made a lot of noise or experimented, as they might turn their nose up at it. They might not like it. But I remember seeing these guys on stage and I'm like, wow, that Tim has got such a command of what he's doing musically. He knows exactly what he wants to do. And it's just, it was cool to see in the video, like how much jazz chops he had and how much of a real musician he was, that I think at first listen, people might not pick up on, but he was such a master at his craft and such a master at putting songs together and doing things in such a unique and visionary way.
Yeah, absolutely. I found that really fascinating too, in terms of kind of digging into how he played with his dad in a jazz band, in a fairly like avant-garde jazz band too. When he was in high school, his dad was a very accomplished jazz musician. His mom is very what's the word? I don't know. She's just completely unassuming and takes no credit for any kind of thing like that. But she transcribes classical pieces for a living, and she's a musician and has this wonderful ear too, but is just very modest about it. But yeah, I mean, he comes from like this kind of musical pedigree that's really elevated, and what he was choosing to do as a teenager even kind of speaks volumes to just how his mind worked in terms of being a composer and an all-around musician. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people might hear Brainiac on first listen and could be dismissive because it's a lot at times, but yeah, I mean, when you kind of strip everything back, there's a really interesting, complex palette that he's working off of for sure.
Because he's working the band wasn't just working melodically and musically with their instruments, but also conceptually and layering sounds and layering what instruments could do when pushed to a certain point, like with distortion or reverb or strange combinations of sounds. And I really enjoyed listening to the producer, Eli.
Yeah, he's great.
And listening to like his kind of his control or his honing or his own chops into like trying to make these cohesive records. And there's a great scene with Juan when he's talking about when Bonsai Superstar was done and in the can, and he's listening to it and he's like, I don't, he's like he's almost like worried.
No, I think he definitely is. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Those are really super great parts that you're able to mine from these interviews. How long did these interviews take? I mean, it must have taken months and months and hundreds of hours.
It wasn't hundreds of hours, but I think we had around 100 probably. And wow. We did interviews over the course of, gosh, it was such a like a, indie project in and of itself.
Right.
I don't even, a year, give or take. I mean, we sort of like we did 2 Kickstarters, and after the first one, we did a huge chunk of interviews, and then I did another round, and then we decided, well, perhaps we should try and bring this film into the present somehow. Again, with the Rock Doc thing and the retrospective, I wanted to kind of do something that we could capture in the present. And so we decided to do this kind of Brainiac tribute show in Brooklyn that we kind of bookend the film with. Is sort of something to kind of bring all the talking heads in the same room and have this celebratory night of music. And so we decided to do that. And then there was more pickups, and, then bands were coming through New York who I would just get wind, and they were like, hey, this band loves Brainiac. You should call their publicist or whatever and see if they want to talk. And they always would. And so it was just always this kind of like very fluid process. But, I'd say a strong 12-month cycle was where we conducted the lion's share of the interviews.
Great diversity of interviews. I love the fact that you got his mom and his sister, so you got family, all the members of the band, and also musicians, producers, people that knew them before they got big or before the climb to fame.
Mm-hmm.
And people knew right away when they first heard them, like, this band is different, and they're really probably going to go places, like really go places. And before his death, they were just about ready to put their names on a contract, presumably with Interscope. Is that right? Interscope?
That's correct. Yeah. I mean, I always joked at Q&As because I always thought it was fascinating too, to look at the range of types of musicians that they influenced. Like, I always like made a joke where it's like, I think this is the only band that, like, Matt from the National and Buzz Osborne from the Melvins agree on. It's like it's a really wide scope of people that, like, it was Mogwai and the National and the Melvins and Jesus Lizard and like all these different Hole and just all these different bands from the era that were distinctly different from one another. All just loved Brainiac. So I always thought that was fascinating, like that. Just the variety of people that they influenced was pretty wide.
Yeah, it's nice to see that the rest of the guys in the band, there's parts of the film, especially after Tim died, where they are not knowing how to put the pieces of their lives back together. And I can only imagine. I remember being in my youth, we played a CD release show, one of my bands, and we had a A&R rep from Capitol come up from Manhattan, Kansas, up to Omaha to see our show. We weren't thinking that we were going to get signed, but we're like, wow, this is really, this is amazing that somebody is coming up with real A&R credentials. I mean, he wasn't just faking it to get in for free. Like, somebody with real credentials is coming to see us, and you never know. And these guys, they're on Lollapalooza. They're doing all these things and all this international press, and these people are calling them the next big thing. They're doing it on their own. They're doing it their own way too. But then Tim dies, and John talking about applying to work at a chili restaurant afterwards, and I was like, wow. I mean, it's really, you're putting all your heart and soul into this creative project, and you're playing in front of these huge crowds, and you're playing and touring with Beck, and you're doing all these great things, and then boom, you got to find a way to eat. You got to find a way to pay rent. You got to find a way to do something. And when he's like, well, it's kind of funny, but it's so sad when he's talking about the manager in the restaurant. Well, why do you want to work here? And he's like, I really like chili, sir. I was like, oh God, what a punch in the gut. And so the film has so much heart to it too. And I don't see that a lot in a lot of, like, music documentaries. It's usually a historical timeline, this, that, but it has so much heart and soul about these friends from Dayton, on the precipice of big things.
Well, thanks. I mean, that's one of the largest compliments that I can hear about it, because again, definitely was setting out to make something that was kind of a little bit larger scope than a music documentary. Mm-hmm. And I felt that this story, definitely warranted that. And, I have to always give a tremendous amount of credit to Ian Jacobs, who edited the film and produced the film. And he and I, somewhere along the lines, just kind of picked this up as a pair and ran with it. And, we painstakingly went over how to, just appropriately address the tragedy in this, and really were very cognizant of the fact that this story is very sensitive. And, just through the course of the whole project, we've grown close with Tim's mom and sister, and really wanted to do right by the band and by his family, and in creating something that was not melodramatic, but emphasized the weight of all this. And that's a fine line to walk. So we spent a lot of hours in the edit room, just, playing devil's advocate and going back and forth as the tone, basically is how we're going to deal with this part of the film. The rest of it kind of was, much easier in comparison, because it was fun, and everyone in there is very funny and has a good sense of humor. Right. And so there was lots of really great anecdotes and humor to use, and, playing around with this being kind of a period piece too, was a lot of fun to kind of conjure up, taking younger viewers back to a time when bands were saying, fuck you to $1 million contract. That's not something that most people can wrap their head around these days. That's not something that happens, but in the 90s, it was selling out was the worst thing you could possibly do, So we wanted to make sure and drive all of those sort of cultural milestones home too, that are really interesting now. Just, not it wasn't a tremendous amount of time ago, but man, in terms of that landscape and what you do as an artist now to survive versus then is radically different.
Oh, now it's please buy my song, or please put it in a Nike commercial. Please do this. And
it was not cool then.
No, and it not only was it not cool,
it could ruin your career.
It would alienate your fan base. Like, fans didn't want, I'm sure, like when Helmet went from Amphetamine to Interscope, they signed pretty much $1 million deal back in '92 before In the Meantime came out, and I always liked Helmet, but I didn't follow him. I wasn't like a diehard Helmet fan, but I'm sure some people were like sellouts. I'm sure, that happened for sure.
It happened to anyone that went beyond the indie label, for sure. There was pushback. Eli, again, he was in Girls Against Boys. He was their producer. He talks about that happening to Girls Against Boys. I remember having that conversation with David Yao at his house about the Jesus Lizard when they signed to Capitol. If you took that next step, there was definitely going to be some blowback for that decision. And it was a very real thing, I think, to put on the scale at the time. All the guys in the band talk about it at length. Like, they were getting, courted by everyone. And as flattering as I'm sure that was on some degree, I think it was scary. And I think it was like, we need to really make a very, very smart decision about what our next move is, or this whole band could be done.
Yeah. And let me ask you this, because I wasn't familiar with the business side of Brainiac. Did they have like a manager or things like that, behind the scenes? Yeah. Okay. Well, I was going to say
yes. I guess I shouldn't say no, but the answer is yes, and it was Juan, the bass player.
Okay.
So it was right. It was they were completely insulated from any of that. So it was those four guys against the world, and they did not have a manager. They were on, at the end, Touch and Go, which was, again, an independent label that gave them free reign. Those guys had never surrendered an inch of any sort of control over their band, their music, or anything that they did.
Or their artwork. I remember, Tim wrote the music, right, and Juan did all the like the press and the artwork and the album covers and things like that. So I want to ask you that carefully, because I didn't know, reading about the band, who their management was. And then there wasn't a manager addressed in the doc, and that's because they didn't have one. That's amazing.
Yeah.
On the precipice of being courted for $1 million deal, and they're, it's the four of them talking about it or thinking about it and working on it. That's something else. In my own small little way, I was talking about it now at 48 with one of my past band member friends. Hello, Jim. And Jim and I were talking about, we were like 18 or 19 before the internet, and we were booking our own shows, and we were writing our own songs and booking our own studio time and trying to scrape together money to put out releases. And, how do we do the next step? Or how do we do this? And it was so much fun that we were doing it ourselves. And it was chaotic and kind of stressful. But looking back on it, man, we believed in ourselves so much and we worked so hard with what we believed in. I don't know if it's the Gen X in me or what it is, but I feel like it prepared me for whatever came my way in life, just like putting myself out there and believing in myself. And that's another thing that I really dug about the documentary. It's like how self-assured these guys were about what they were doing when their music was so different and it was so personal to them. It didn't sound like anybody else, but it was so satisfying for for them as musicians. It's great. That really hit home as a musician. Watching that doc or watching those parts of the doc.
Yeah, same. I mean, in my estimation, there's no greater, feat that you can reach as an artist or a band for that matter, where, and I know everyone says no one else sounds like the. Again, I mean, I've listened to music my entire life. I'm a music junkie. There isn't really anyone else that sounds like this band, and it is a weird, strange sound. And to be wholly committed and confident in that and never wavering, just really speaks volumes, I think, to their craft and their artistry and how they were not influenced or really cared about money or success necessarily, commercial success or things like that. It's a completely refreshing and a beautiful, pure thing to witness something like that. It's sort of just a ball of pure creativity, and it wasn't tainted by anything, which was. It's rare. It's really rare.
Yeah. So growing up there and having them be local heroes, when they started getting, big, Lollapalooza, touring with Beck, all these big things, MTV videos, what was the vibe like, back in Dayton? Were people in the music scene, cautiously watching them to make sure they didn't sell out, or were people like super proud of them, or were there haters, or what was the vibe in Dayton like when they were on their way up?
No, I think those guys were always champion, and for those reasons that we just spoke about, that they were wholly original, from their style, the way they dressed, to their music, to their attitude. They also this was, a very purposeful thing as well. They didn't play in Dayton hardly ever.
Oh.
So, once they kind of started, they were like, we're not here to be hometown heroes. We are here to be working musicians, and we want to be on the road as much as possible. And they didn't play Dayton a lot. But, I'm a bit younger than those guys. So I sort of wasn't quite in like that social circle. I would attend the shows, but I was in high school, and these guys were in their early mid-20s. So, as far as I'm concerned, these guys were like, sort of gods in terms of the local music scene and so forth. But I think, having conducted all these interviews and rehashing all this, I think that was the general consensus, is that, there was like, again, you had Guided by Voices and the Breeders and other bands like that. But I think like the sort of really ultra hip in the know, music fans were always the ones that were kind of like, this band is our band, from here. This is the really cool band that's gonna do something,
Yeah, it's funny. Like I mentioned this record store in Omaha that had the Grass Records connection, and maybe I didn't mention that part, but Mousetrap, that was on Grass, the guy that ran the record store, he financed their first 7 inches that got the attention of different labels, and they finally signed to Grass. And he was a real connoisseur of punk and jazz. I remember going down there when I was like 16 or 17 and I'm a trumpet player, so I was buying like a Wynton Marsalis CD, and Dave Sink looked at that and he's like, "No, put that back." He's like, you're going to buy this. And so he made me buy this Miles Davis record that I never heard of before. And it wasn't like Kind of Blue. It wasn't Sketches of Spain. It was a obscure one. And,
like On the Corner or something?
I don't think it was On the Corner. I think it was Cicely Tyson was on the cover, and I can't remember the name. It starts with an N. Nefertili, something like that.
Okay.
You know which one I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And when he was married to Cicely Tyson. And he's like, no, you don't want to buy Wynton Marsalis. You want to buy this. And so he was always like steering us like into the cooler, the hip, the different kind of music. And, when Smack Money Baby came out, I was 19. So I, was full of piss and vinegar. I thought I knew everything that, I was, don't talk to me about music. I'm a musician. And so he introduced us, and God bless him, to all these different bands that we wouldn't have heard of because there was no internet. There was, we read Maximum Rock and Roll or Alternative Press or the College Music Journal.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how we kind of learned about music in Omaha.
Same here. Yeah.
Yeah. So if Dave didn't recommend it down in the basement of the Antiquarium,
no good.
Right. If he didn't recommend it, it wasn't any good. It wasn't worth your time. and he championed.
You need someone like that.
As a kid, 19, I did. I absolutely did. I need somebody that knew music, that knew jazz. He was always listening to stuff, classical, jazz, indie, and setting us straight in kind of a, I don't want to say arrogant way, but just like, no, you're not. I'm not. Yeah. I'm not gonna. I'm a record store owner, and I'm not selling you that CD. I'm not. I'll sell that to somebody else. But you need to buy this one. And so it was good that we had that.
Well, Tim Taylor worked at the record store that was the record store for me. He worked at Trader Vic's. That I went and got all the local cool stuff, and whoever was behind the counter would always, be like, check out this John Spencer Blues Explosion or this, whatever. At the time, that where I was in high school, and I was like, what's that? They're important places. I don't know if they really exist anymore for younger kids per se, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Again, cultural differences from the 90s to now.
Well, and that's the truth, not to be, the old man.
Yeah, we're getting dangerously close into that territory right about now.
No, but it's important. No, I think it's important though to talk about
when I was 19.
Right. But it was a special time. And for a musician who was studying jazz and classical and playing in rock bands, and it was just so exciting going to see them live. We've been talking about their records and their tours and stuff like that, but the live show, man, the live show is phenomenal. Like I said earlier, like this is a guy, especially, but all of them in command of their instruments. I didn't have a chance to see him when Michelle was playing. I think I was online chatting with Craig, who is the bass player from Mousetrap. And he kept like copious notes of like when people came into town and stuff like that. But he says that Brainiac played in Omaha one time with Michelle, and I didn't see that show, but he was like talking about it and how great that was. And I saw them at the Capitol, which is included in your doc. And then they played another time at a place called the Cog Factory. And I don't know if you've ever heard of the Cog Factory in Omaha. It was a DIY indie rock, punk rock club that was started by 20-year-olds that existed out as a music venue out of the controls of like the Omaha Liquor Commission, out of the controls of, tax evasion, got them in the end because they didn't know they had to pay. They didn't know. There's a great documentary about the Cog Factory. I'll forward you the link that some local filmmakers made.
Sounds good.
But
that's funny though.
But Brainiac played there, and there was a tornado warning that night. And due to my youth and partying, I don't remember exactly what the circumstances were with what happened with the tornado. Didn't come through Omaha, but there was a tornado warning that night. But just their live show was so red hot, man. He was just on fire on stage, and it was and Tyler's drumming. Never heard anything pounding out like that, to that guitar soundscape, to that bass playing, to the thrashing and the singing and the everything on stage, it's just lightning in a bottle. Lightning in a bottle.
Yeah, whole package. I mean, what struck me is I'm a massive fan of the Jesus Lizard, and definitely think David Yao is one of the most incredible frontman I've ever seen in my life. And when I interviewed him for the film, he said that he was intimidated by Tim, and it really like kind of blew me away, because I was like, well, okay, I think like Iggy Pop and David Yao are like sort of the quintessential frontmen for that type of music, and to hear him say like this guy was kind of intimidating to me as an opening act for them at the time, it spoke volumes about Tim's stage presence and live performance and stuff too.
Yeah. Well, now when you're putting it together, and you're talking to Tim's mom, did it take much convincing, or, you're talking about a mother-son, you have pictures of him as a baby sitting in his dad's guitar case. Did it take convincing, or did you show her cuts of the film beforehand, or did she just kind of stay hands off, or what was like her involvement other than the interviews?
Yeah, we had a different dynamic. She was the only person I didn't ask about Tim's passing in the interviews. And I just felt like, why do that? It just didn't make any sense to me to have her relive that when everyone else is and can speak to it. It seemed kind of, it just didn't feel right to me. So we didn't have that conversation, although she would sort of bring up, things about it naturally, but I never really asked about that with her. And I think she was the only one I gave a copy of the film to, sort of in stages and before the release at South by Southwest. The band saw it cold, which in hindsight maybe was mean to drop on them, because it's heavy for them too. And I showed them little snippets of it, but I didn't show them the whole film until the premiere. But I showed it to Linda first because I wanted her blessing, and I wanted to also not have, I just didn't know how that was going to land, and I didn't want that to be in a theater with a bunch of people. So I gave her a copy first, and she always just really loved everything about it. We just had a really good rapport, and I think that she wanted to talk and to do it, and I think that she's since told me how healing it was for her family to have this, have gone through the process of this film, and to have this kind of keepsake, for her son, and to kind of keep his legacy alive. So we've always had a very close relationship, and I just always, it was always at the forefront of my mind to just be as respectful as humanly possible, because at the end of the day, it's a great band and a lot of people love the music and this and that, but like you said, it's someone's son, and I can't imagine what all she's gone through, and so I always wanted to be very sensitive to that fact. But I think, again, it's been a really healing thing for everyone that's been involved in this, which has been a really lovely byproduct of the project.
Yeah, I appreciate that answer, and how you just kind of laid that out. And it must have been a great byproduct of being able to open up and talk about your feelings about this band, and not just their music, but just who they were as people. And, this was, somebody's son, it was somebody's brother, it was somebody's friend, it was somebody's sweetheart, and the way that, especially their peers talked about them, and how, not just about Tim, but all of them, like just how, as a band, they just really respected and admired them, and just really thought that they were really original and clever and funny and entertaining as hell and exciting. I just kind of think back to the energy that the whole band had on stage, and the energy in the club, and just how fucking loud it was, and how insane it was, and just such a great time. It just put such a great energy out, visually, audio wise, just everything. It was great. Were there a lot of outtakes? I mean, do you have a lot of? Was there ever thought of like director's cut? Well, I mean, it's your cut, but you know what I mean, like extra interviews or things that was it hard to, put things in the film and leave things out?
Oh, it's incredibly difficult. That's the hardest thing. Yeah. I mean, you could have there could be a 4-hour Brainiac cut and I would watch it. But again, going back to Ian, who edited the film, he's not from Dayton. And so he was so helpful in helping me kind of police some inside baseball or Dayton centric things that were nostalgic for me personally. Mm-hmm. But he was like, you know what, dude, no one cares about that. And I was like, okay, I appreciate that, because we were like at some point we had a 2-hour and 45-minute cut of this or something, I was like, nothing can come out, and he's like, okay, well, let's start to get really ruthless with some of this stuff. But the DVD has an extra chapter in it that has more of like Tim's childhood stuff, more of the jazz things. No one buys DVDs anymore, but we threw a bunch of bonus things on the DVD that exist that are kind of cool extras. And then people are so excited and articulate and wonderful and the comments they brought, but you can't include all of it. So it's those are the days that are heartbreaking, where you have to just lose something that you're so in love with, but it just doesn't serve the film. And so there's plenty of things on the cutting room floor that are worthy of being seen, and I'm sure the more diehard fans would get a kick out of it. And we tried to include some of that stuff. I think if you actually rent or buy the film on Vimeo, we uploaded a bunch of those things too, knowing that people don't typically watch things on DVD anymore. So some of that bonus material I think is included on the Vimeo if you buy the film or rent the film through there. Cool.
Yeah, it was a great time machine for me to go back and I'm mellowed out now. But when I was 19, 20, 21 and this energetic, crazy, hectic music was coming out, it just fueled my late adolescence and early adulthood.
Yeah, sure.
I just absolutely loved it. And there's a line in there that somebody was talking about seeing Brainiac, and it was they are a time capsule spinning into the future, which is now.
Right. Yeah.
I was like, that's such a great line. I just absolutely adore that line. And I really had such a great time watching this entire film, man. And for you to put it together, must have been just a labor of love, man. I mean, as a Brainiac fan, a guy from Ohio, a musician yourself, just music's so important to you. I just really appreciated it. It's just like for me to kind of go back in my thoughts and what was important to me. I just was sitting there watching and kind of reliving like my youth, and not waxing poetic like an old man, but like really like those were special, fun times, man. I just really, really enjoyed that era of music and that era of my life and bands and the whole indie punk scene and Brainiac was such a big part of it for sure.
Yeah, I did as well, and thanks for saying that. That's very kind to hear, and hearing that kind of feedback's really, really lovely, and makes it all worthwhile. I mean, those kinds of films are a labor of love, and they are they're really difficult, frankly, to make with very little resources. This was done sheerly because of crowdfunding, people wanting to see this project, people loving that band. And I was very honored to be given the keys to that, to be able to kind of, put together the, the definitive version of that band's lifespan and Tim's, career and yeah, it was just such a treat and an honor for me to be involved, and I'm really pleased with how it came out. I'm glad that it's resonating with other people from that time and fans of that kind of music and so forth.
Now, longtime listeners of my show, and I know we have just a few minutes left together, but longtime listeners of the show know that I deal with a lot of paranormal and off the wall kind of topics. And so at the end of your documentary, people talk about Tim visiting them in their dreams and saying it's okay to go, or, just kind of saying goodbye. And Tim's mom had a music box that hadn't worked in years. And at some point, I forget the circumstances, but she was opening up, was it when she was opening up the scrapbooks or something? And the music played on this long since dormant music box and things like that. And I read a lot about psychic phenomenon, and not to get too crazy on you, but a spirit as powerful and so just so creative and exuded so much energy and connected with so many people. I can't help but think, though, stay with me here, Eric. I can't help but think that maybe there's something to that. Like there might be something there with all of his ability to connect to people on such a primal level with music and writing waves and being able to evoke emotions musically, that maybe there is something to be said about he was perhaps saying goodbye. He was tinkling the music box to let people know that, things are okay. And it's okay to look at these scrapbooks or listen to this music. And it's okay to kind of go back in time a little bit. And I kind of like to think, maybe it's just the weirdo in me, but I kind of like to think that there are ways that we can communicate with each other, especially when he was so powerful, communicating through music,
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that topic is personally fascinating to me, and it's one that I've wrestled with and investigated for most of my adult life, and I still don't know where I land on it. Mm-hmm. I get very enthusiastic about the idea of people's energy being around and being able to tap into that. And then I also have a very cynical view of it as well. And so I don't quite know where I land on it. Although I secretly desire that to be true, that there is some sort of other plane of existence energetically that we can potentially habitate and communicate with those that are on this plane. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know where I land on it. I will say, and we kept this in the film, the one thing that did strike me as odd was when I interviewed his mom, she was telling an anecdote about this argument that they got into, and every single time she's told the story, that all of our lights went out, like they were lighting her. And first time, no big deal, it's an anomaly or whatever. It happened 3 times. And I think we kept the last take where she was like, all right, he doesn't want me to tell his story, But it was strange. I don't know what to make of it. Right. The rest of the interview, we had no problems, but the lights go out 3 times during this story of, her rehashing an argument they had. It was funny. And, we left it in the film because I think, why not? Why not believe in that or at least be open to the fact that, potentially there is some sort of way to interact with people that are no longer with us. So yeah, I don't know, but I agree with you. It's a very interesting area to at least be open to and explore.
Yeah. If nothing else, it's just another way maybe the universe just kind of reminds us and it can give us pause and just give us an opportunity just to kind of, just think and let something like that cross our mind and his memory just kind of, fill our thoughts just for a little bit, just to say hello. That's all,
Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. No, it's super interesting. And, I mean, that in particular, I thought was very, very funny. Yeah. Very, very funny.
Yeah. Well, my hat's off to you. It's fantastic. And I'll make sure to put links up. I think I'll put links up, to the show to the doc, to your website for it and everything. And if maybe somewhere on social media, I'll share with my listeners if they want to go back to 1994 or 5 to the Capitol Bar and Grill in Omaha, Nebraska, and check out the Brainiac show in its entirety.
Oh, yeah.
I don't even know who filmed it. I don't know who the person was. Like with something like that, did you find it on YouTube or did somebody send it to you? Like, how do you get concert footage like that?
Yeah, both. And that show in particular, I don't know who did that. We were advised legally that, like, you know, we exhausted our due diligence in trying to find the owner of that footage.
Oh, that's funny.
But I don't know. So you know, there's still a release to be signed from whoever shot that. But it's been on YouTube forever.
Yeah.
I mean, I bought a Brainiac bootleg VHS on eBay like in 1999 or something, and it had just like 6 shows on it, and that was one of them. So I mean, this tape's been circulating for a million years. So again, I don't know if you want to. If anyone wants to claim it, we can give you a special shout out. Obviously, it's too late, but
I was telling my friend that I was going to be talking to you, and he's been my friend Doug. Hi, Doug. Doug's been my friend for at least a dozen years, and we were talking about that. And he's like, "Well, yeah, I saw him at the Capitol." I'm like, "I saw him at the Capitol." Like, we both attended the show long years, you know, before we ever met each other formally and became friends. So we were united in music even before we became friends. So, and that's the power,
nice. And this
power of Brainiac right there.
And this is, I assume this is going to air after all of this, but it's worth mentioning. They just did, I think, 11 or 12 dates with Mogwai in the UK this past week that all looked incredible, and they got wonderful reviews. And they're going to be in Dayton this Friday, and in Cincinnati the night after, and a show in Detroit as well. So they're you know, they're still getting asked to do really wonderful things, and are you know, operating on a level that's really powerful. And it seems to, you know, obviously Tim's loss is tremendous, and that's shoes that can never be filled. But they did do a few concerts in conjunction with the film release. We did one in LA, we did one in New York, we did one in Dayton, and now with this tour, and they execute this music live in a very, very powerful and wonderful way. And I think that people that missed it are really thankful. You know, I've seen time and time and again in person, and I've gotten emails and phone calls from people that have been like, Jesus, like I saw this music live for the first time, and I never thought I would ever experience it live at all. And so, you know, they're still kind of, I don't know if they're not really a functioning band per se, but I know that they are, you know, doing dates, and they just did this wonderful UK tour. And, you know, by all accounts, it seems like it's been a really, really positive and great trip for them. So I'm looking forward to seeing them this Friday and experiencing that live again.
Well, Eric, thank you, first of all, for making such a great film. And thank you also for taking the time to reminisce and to talk about this wonderful band with this old punk rock guy over here in Omaha. I really appreciate your work on the film and your passion for your hometown band, and it's just such a great film, and for you to take the time to talk with me for an hour about it and give me some insight into a wonderful film. I'm so appreciative.
Oh yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm very appreciative of you as well for all the kind words, and I'm really glad that you dug it. And yeah, like I said, if we can kind of connect with people that love that music, or find some new people to turn on to it, that's always such a nice thing to do and to hear. So thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, everybody. I've had the pleasure of having Eric Mahoney on the show. We're talking about Transmissions from Zero. Great film about a great band, Brainiac. And this episode is now a time capsule spinning into the future, which is now. Thank you, Eric.
You got it. Thanks, Ben.
You bet. There we go, everybody. Episode 245. with Eric Mahoney and his film Transmissions After Zero. The story of Brainiac. Man, I really enjoyed that conversation because it took me back in time. Nowadays, I put on my AirPods and I go jogging listening to Brainiac. When back in the 90s, let's just say I was enjoying myself partying listening to Brainiac. All right, everybody. I thank you so much for checking out the show, for your subscriptions, your likes, your comments, your emails. Keep it coming. If you haven't gone to Spotify and left a rating yet, I ask you to please consider it. Same thing over at iTunes. I'm told it makes a big difference. Who knows with all these manipulations of algorithms nowadays? I mean, it can't hurt, right? All right, coming up in April, the OGs of the world of the paranormal. Episode 246 with Ron Moorhead, The Secrets of the Sierra Sounds. And episode 247, Lloyd Auerbach, The Paranormal Professor. So have a great night, a great life. Now go get some sleep.